Mets season officially came to an end at the hands of the Los Angeles Dodgers as we welcome you to episode number 48 of the Queen's Connection, a production of Patton Sports Creative. I am your host, Andrew Patton, joined by the co-host, Corne Hogavine. Like I said, Corne, it's been a week since the Mets season came to an end. I guess we'll start with just the Dodgers series. Was there one thing that really stood out to you about why the Mets were not able to quote unquote pull off the upset and continue their magical run?
I think it was pretty clear that the Dodgers offense, them not chasing, was a big part of the Mets' downfall in most of the games. I think their offense were really good in not biting on some pitches. I think the exact opposite from what we saw against the Phillies, where in big moments, Phillies hitters tend to chase pitches, and the Mets took advantage of that. But the Dodgers were just their at bats were just too good overall, which lead to a lot of runs allowed. I also think that it's obvious that some pitchers may be a little bit gassed after the years they had. So that combination, I think, for the Mets offense, it was really hard to put together uh, big offensive days every day against the Dodgers pitching, which I can blame the I cannot blame the offense for that. I think if you score 7 runs, 12 runs, 5 runs um, in a couple of games, then your offense does its job. But if you allow the amount of runs the Mets did in the series, especially the amount of walks with the Mets allowed in the series, I think it was a clear it was clear who was the better team in that series. And I mean, the Dodgers weren't the number one seed for nothing, even with all the injuries. So um, we just got outplayed. We just got beat.
Yeah, and obviously the Dodgers have carried that momentum over to the World Series, where they currently have a 2-0 series lead on the New York Yankees. Are you diving into the World Series at all, or are you just kind of just following along, just checking scores, seeing uh, what's going on with that now that the New York Mets are not playing baseball anymore?
I did watch the first 2 games because, I mean, I'm not going to say this on air. Maybe who knows who is watching, but I did watch the first 2 games. I won't watch the next couple live. I probably will watch it in the morning when I wake up. Just put it on. Not obviously not as invested, but I thought they were both pretty close ball games that were played. Both went to the Dodgers, obviously. So I had fun watching the games. I have no preference of who wins. I don't care if it's the Dodgers or the Yankees, even if it's the Yankees. I don't really care about that. I think it's a pick between two teams I rather don't see in the World Series, but oh well, it is what it is. So I just want to see some good baseball games.
Yeah, I was talking to people about the Mets losing to the Dodgers, other than you, shockingly. Um, and I told them that,
I didn't know you have friends.
well, they're more coworkers than friends. I'll put it that
Oh,
way. Um, but I was saying that I would probably, with the obviously it sucked with the Mets losing to the Dodgers and everything. It's is over. Um, because especially with the baseball schedule, there's mostly a game every. You got a game every night. You get the off days every now and then. So for the last what you know 8 9 months, whatever, basically going back to February of late February of this year, you pretty much got a baseball game almost every day. So now that it's over, kind of have to get in a little bit of a new routine going. Um, so obviously there's adjustments there, poor me, whatever. But I was saying, getting back to the original point, I would have, I probably would have rather the Mets lost to the Dodgers like they did, rather than make it to the World Series and lose to the Yankees, because that would be really tough to stomach. Just obviously because there's the New York thing, but then, um, it's the Yankees. So that would have been, and it's always tough to lose when they get that far. I mean, you just think about 2015 with the Royals; they got that far, and you lose, and it's tough to stomach as a fan. I'm sure as a player, coach, whatever, it's a little bit more difficult. They probably take it a little bit harder. But overall though, a tremendous season. I know maybe in the moment when Alvarez grounds out to end the game, you're not initially thinking that maybe, but you take a couple of days, a day or two to come back to earth a little bit, and you look back on the season and you say, thinking about where they were on June 2nd to be playing baseball in late October. Pretty incredible run and season that the New York Mets had.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if when I watched the last game, I already, you kind of felt like during that game, obviously that the Mets were out of it. Then it already started to settle in a little bit to me. I watched the end of the game. Just you never know, but the feeling I think already there was, oh well, when we're not gonna get to the World Series. Um, and then for me, actually, pretty quickly it turned to I'm extremely proud of this team. Obviously, you want to get to the World Series, but I had hope with Shamanaya on the mound in Game 6, but we saw early on that Shamanaya just didn't have his Shamanaya stuff like he did in the second half, and after Shamanaya struggled, I just noticed that the Mets don't have that good of a bullpen, especially if you put it against the Dodgers bullpen to probably um, get a to probably erase the deficit. So on that point on, watching the game, I'm already started to turn and notice that it's probably not going to be this year. And so yeah, I had a pretty quick turnaround for me being proud instead of me being overly disappointed. And I'm extremely proud of this team. Like you said, I think we saw a lot of good things. I think we saw an organization in the first year with Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns, who I bet will be part of this organization for a long time, stabilizing, being better, and showing that getting arms that you don't necessarily 100% know what you're going to get from. And all those arms had good seasons. And I think that's a telling point. And that's a telling point for David Stearns, who has done that for years. So even if we don't spend at the top of the free agency market on certain things, uh, you can bet that Stearns knows what he's doing. And I think that's a tremendous plus for this organization.
Yeah, and obviously, future episodes will probably be diving into
Yeah,
those maybe the 2025 versions of Shamanaya and Luis Severino that the Mets could potentially target if that is the direction they decide to go in as an organization when it comes to addressing the pitching. Because, like you said, or as it's been reported and talked about ad nauseum, Shamanaya is going to opt out of his contract. Luis Severino is a straight free agent. Jose Quintana is a straight free agent. I think I saw a number. It was like the Mets are going to be losing 37% of their innings from pitchers that are going to be they're going to be free agents and whatnot. So that's a pretty good sized chunk of your innings from this year. And obviously they have their work cut out to uh, assemble those arms and get those innings and whatnot. But if this year proved anything, you feel pretty confident that maybe if it's not the sexiest name that they bring in on the starting pitching market, if it's not Corbin Burns or Max Fried or whoever you might want the Mets to sign, you can feel pretty good knowing that they probably have an idea on how to tinker with this guy and get him to be a solid major league arm. Um, so you have to feel confident in the coaching staff and the front office that whoever they bring in, they're going to get the most out of them.
yeah, absolutely, and yeah, definitely. And if you look at, I think it was exactly the same last year with less money. Last year we didn't have a lot of money for Mets figures to spend, and this year we have a lot more money to spend, which obviously make some decisions maybe a little bit easier. Last year, I think we had to do what we did. This year, we might do it a little bit different, but obviously we need more than just one arm. So you're not going to get Corbin Burns and Max Fried and trade for Garrett Crochet or something like that. That's not going to happen. So you're gonna need to find an arm that hopefully gives you the same production like those guys do. And I have complete trust in David Stearns to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's also possible that the way they fill in some of those innings is by bringing one of those guys back. I think that's plausible
Sure.
that um, Mania or Severino could come back. I think personally, um, Jose Quintana's probably gone just based on age and stuff like that. But I don't rule out maybe they bring him back, see how the market goes. But I would say if from those three guys, the most likely ones to come back are Mania and Severino, and I don't think it's going to be both. I think it would just be one. And if I had to guess, it would probably be Sean Mania would be the more valuable one, between those two. But obviously, that's kind of just a we'll wait and see and see how the market develops for those guys, and um, go from there. But uh, just the season overall, like we talked about, was fun. Maybe stressful at times. Downright disappointing at times too, early in the season. But when you take everything and you add it all up, one of the more memorable seasons in the 20 years I've been watching the New York Mets. Does it rise to the occasion of like 2015? It maybe doesn't top that for me, but it's no, it's up there. It's pretty damn close, pretty close. So we'll always remember the 2024 New York Mets, and hopefully, what they did this year is just a building block for positive things to come.
That's what Stearns said before 2024. We're gonna compete, but maybe some limit here and there in the payroll. And so yeah, we saw a lot of good things this year. We probably gonna mention some of those good things later in this episode. So not gonna spoil it all.
Well, with a season like that, everyone gives out their awards or they do their grades or whatnot. So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm not sure how long the segment will take, but we'll see how it goes. We are going to hand out the Queen's Connection Awards. We tried not to overlap on some, but some you just can't. No, there was a couple overlaps because some are pretty obvious, like
Yeah,
the MVP, as we'll start off with that. But uh, we'll say that like I said, we try to have different names for these categories, and we'll kick things off with the MVP. And I should say that you had the first pick in all of these, so I had to get a little creative on my end
yeah,
sometimes. But
yeah.
uh,
And it's also good to mention that on our own list we can duplicate. So if we have one award given out, for example, the MVP Francisco Lindor can be the most clutch.
right.
Um, that's also important because we wanted to give as much match players their flowers
Right. Or
as you want.
maybe they're a chunk of coal at times.
Yeah. We also have some negative awards, but luckily we mostly have some positive awards.
Right. And you alluded to it right there, the team MVP. Surprise, surprise, Francisco Lindor, the year he had. Unfortunately, no, from the real more important awards, the baseball writer ones. If Shohei Ohtani didn't have the year he did, I feel pretty comfortable that Francisco Lindor was going to win the first MVP in franchise history, but he can at least settle knowing that he won the Queen's Connection MVP for the 2024 season. So, I mean, what else can you say
He's
about
probably
Lindor?
pleased with that. He's
Right.
probably pleased with that.
But what else can you say
Yeah.
about the year Lindor had? Unbelievable. Should be a Gold Glove finalist. He'll probably be a Silver Slugger finalist for shortstop, but I mean, I don't know. We'll see. But I have to feel pretty confident he'd be a finalist for that.
Yeah. You
So,
never know. He probably is going to finish in the top three of the MVP, and I think that's the main thing. Like you said, Otani. If Otani didn't have the year he had, uh, maybe even slightly worse being a DH, I think Lindor had a good chance. But unfortunately. I think it's gonna be the betting man, Shohei Ohtani. Hopefully, he didn't bet on himself winning the MVP. That would be extra salt on the wounds. But Francisco Lindor is clearly um, he's the best player in the National League East, and the National League East is filled with pretty good players, and he was the best player. So that definitely tells you something.
No doubt about that. I think we should get the other uh, overlap or same player uh, that we had, and I believe this is just the last one we had. Most improved. It's probably the guy who handled third base and slugged a lot in the postseason as well. Mark Vientos. Maybe not the stellar defense you'd like to see down there, but definitely improved in that aspect as well. Now it's going to be a matter of, is he actually going to stay there? Is he going to move across the diamond? Is he going to be the DH? Like I said, another discussion to have in the future episode. Um, but Mark Vientos easily the most improved Met on this team.
Definitely. I remember before the season that I wasn't a big believer, and I thought Brett Beatty would be the guy. Mark Viento struck out way too many times, also in the minor leagues. His OPS in a major league wasn't necessarily really good, but he proved me wrong. His power is for real. He goes to center field a lot with a lot of power, a bit like JD Martinez did in his prime. So I should definitely see that there's some help from JD out there for Mark Vientos, but obviously he did it by himself. And we have at least, we don't know where he's going to play, but we have a middle of the order bet for years to come. And finally, the Mets have developed a hitter, which is also something we haven't saw a lot in recent years. So two major pluses there for the Mets and the Mets organization, and Mark Vientos, obviously. Kudos to him.
Yes, definitely good job on Mark Vientos to because it wasn't an easy path for him this year, and he fought through it and has established himself as, like you said, a middle of the order bat for this franchise for years to come. So I believe the overlaps are out of the way. So let's move on to the Cy Young Award winners for the New York Mets this year. I will let you go first. Who is your Mets Cy Young Award winner?
Well, because we can duplicate, if we could, I would probably have the same answer as Sean Manaea, but I wanted to give this guy some positive. I think David Peterson was a tremendous arm for the Mets. Um, Peterson had a tremendous season, 2.91 ERA over 121 innings. His hip surgery definitely made him in a different pitcher. Doesn't strike out a lot of batters anymore, but he got a lot of ground balls. If you first half, not necessarily in the ERA wise, but the whip was pretty high in the first half. He walked his fair share of people, but he was able to work out of jams in the second half. He improved his walk rate. He improved his whip. He had a 2.97 ERA. And not only did he pitch well in starts, he pitched well in big starts. He had that start in Milwaukee where he was tremendous. He had to save in the NLDS game three, which obviously was huge coming in after DS. So Peterson did everything for us. So I didn't see a spot where Peterson would be on other of our awards. So I went with Peterson for the Cy Young, and now Andrew can say the guy who probably deserves it more, but hey, I think you liked picking like me picking David Peterson for yourself because you're a big David Peterson guy. So kudos, David Peterson, tremendous year. And another guy, just like Mark Vientos, who has a spot in the Mets rotation, middle of the pack right there.
Yeah, you stole my thunder with the David Peterson one. I was kind of banking on you taking this guy, who I ended up settling on. Yeah, and that's of course Sean Manaea, who really established himself as the ace of the rotation, with Senga being out, and definitely in the second half, Manaea making those adjustments that really helped spark this big run for the Mets. Um, he had a tremendous season. Unfortunately, maybe fell off a little bit in the postseason, particularly that once the fifth inning of or the sixth inning of Game 2 against the Dodgers, he said he hit that wall and Unfortunately, that wall kind of carried over into Game Six. But overall, Shamanai had a tremendous season for the Mets. Pitched some big games for him. Game Three against the Phillies in the National League Division Series. Game threes when you're tied at one apiece in the best of five is uh, you know arguably the most important game unless you get to that Game Five. Um, and he just balled out in that game too was unbelievable. Um, so Shamanai, tip of the cap to him for a guy, like a lot of these guys, they'll kind of bet on themselves deals. Him and Severino, he bet on himself, and now he's going to go cash in with a big contract. Uh, Salary wise, not maybe length wise, but salary wise, he's going to cash in big time. So Shamanaya is my pick for the Mets Cy Young Award winner. We will move on to Rookie of the Year. I'll let you go first because once again, this was a guy I kind of had in mind as like a kind of an under the radar pick for Rookie of the Year because honestly, the Mets, didn't have a whole lot of rookies on this team, so it was kind of slim pickings. So, um, if you can put two and two together, I think you might have a good idea of who Mr. Corne is going to select for his Rookie of the Year.
Well, I hope it's still a little bit surprisingly. I don't think many say relievers, but Daniel Nunez came out of nowhere this year. Had a 2.31 ERA over 35 innings and 48 strikeouts with a whip under one. He was awesome. Like I said, a little bit unexpected. We saw a glimpse of Daniel Nunez in spring training last year um, when he showed his good stuff. And I think we both thought, oh well, that could be an arm that might get a look for the Mets during the season. He did. I think he's definitely one guy we truly missed in the postseason. I think he's a dominant arm. I mean, like I said, 35 innings, 48 strikeout, whip on the run. That's dominant numbers. That's great numbers. Um, so luckily, another guy we have for next year, another young guy we will have for the bullpen for years to come. He's my rookie of the year. Obviously, not. We had years where he had more to pick from. In the rookie parts, you also have Luis Angel Acuna, who you didn't pick as well, so I didn't spoil it there. And I think after that, that's pretty much it. So uh, besides maybe a guy who pitches one inning or something like that, but for people who had some more playing time, there are three guys where you probably could have picked out. So Andrew, go ahead and let us know your.
Yeah, I thought about picking Luis Angel Acuna just because the time he got called up, the situation at hand, he made the most of his opportunity and showed when he's at his best the kind of player he could be for the Mets. And maybe that's a direction I should have gone in. But I ended up going with Christian Scott. I know the numbers aren't exactly amazing. Still has yet to record his first major league win, even though we both have discussed that win-loss record doesn't really mean a whole lot when it comes to evaluating pitchers. But he did show glimpses at times of the kind of pitcher he can be for this team. Unfortunately, we won't see him next year because of the Tommy John surgery and whatnot. But he did have some really solid starts for the Mets, and he got called up at a time when Mets starters were struggling and to get deep into games, and he had a couple six inning outings, which at that time was pretty big for the rotation. So Christian Scott, I went as with my rookie of the year just because, like I said, we saw the glimpses of what he could be for this rotation. Hopefully, all goes well with his recovery and 2026. It's a guy that can come into spring training. Maybe there's an open spot in the rotation he could compete for, and get back on the mound and pitch some solid innings for the New York Mets. So I went with Christian Scott for my Rookie of the Year as we move on to the Best Signing Award, Best Offseason Signing Award for the New York Mets. Who did you select here?
Well, there's my spot for Shamanaya was the best signing. Um, Picked it also because before the last offseason, he was a guy I advocated for the Mets to get. So it's a little bit also good job on myself. I found I wanted him, and the Mets got him, and he did well. You mentioned all the things he was awesome for us, so I'm not going to repeat that. But for the price and what the Mets had given up for Sean Manaea, it was definitely I would say a risky move, but I think it was a well educated guess that he would be at least solid for this team, and he went beyond that and was actually tremendous for this team.
Yeah, I went with Luis Severino as my best signing. Obviously, Severino was one of the first moves made in the offseason by David Stearns, and there was obviously a lot of hesitation from the fan base about bringing in Luis Severino, who had a pretty awful year for the New York Yankees, to put it frankly. Uh, and but we no, we both said that there's potential there. It's just a matter of kind of tinkering with him. Let him get in the pitching lab with Jeremy Hefner and figure something out. And what came out was a really solid major league starter. 3.91 ERA, the WHIP 1.24. The strikeout numbers were, maybe not what people are accustomed to thinking with Luis Severino, but that's because he was inducing a lot of ground balls and incorporating the sinker more this year. But even still, 182 innings, he had 161 strikeouts. That's not terrible. Definitely show that he could strike guys out when he needed to. Um, so Luis Severino was my pick for best signing by the New York Mets. And obviously they have good signings, which means they've also probably had some bad signings. So now we'll move on to the worst signing award. You picked probably the low hanging fruit one there, but it was just unfortunately this did not work out for this guy with the New York Mets, and his tenure was short lived, to say the least.
Yeah, Joey Wendell. Joey Wendell came into the Mets to have a big role on this team, and that's why I picked him. He was a guy who probably was the guy to give McNeil some rest, to give Lindor some rest. Really, that you call the fifth infielder type guy. I don't know if there's a word for it. We have the fourth outfielder type guy, but he was kind of like that fifth infielder type guy. Came off a bad year, but the years before he was actually pretty solid, and he was replacing a guy in Luis Guillorme who fans liked, but his production just wasn't that great. So at the time when the Mets signed him, I thought, oh well, he's. I get what the Mets were doing, getting an upgrade over Luis Guillorme, just making the whole 26-man roster better. Unfortunately, that 1 year bad year for Joey Wendell in Miami wasn't just a fluke. It turns out that he's probably a little bit done as a good major league player because he was awful on all parts of the field, especially on defense. I was shocked because Joey Wendell was seen as a good defender, and he made critical errors early in the season um, to not justify him being on the roster. I do want to say that although it was a bad signing, it didn't cost a lot for the Mets. It was a cheap signing. And second, they got him loose very soon. So no GM is perfect, or for in the Mets case, president of baseball operations is perfect in signing guys. You're gonna miss some, so when you miss, it's good to notice it quickly and just move on, and that's what Stearns did. So even a bad signing turned out to be a pretty decent outcome with the Mets going with Jose Iglesias very soon after. So that turned out pretty well, I would say.
Yeah, obviously, Joey Wendell, I think it was like a $2 million deal. So, like you said, not a whole lot of money. And they cut him loose. This guy also didn't get a whole lot of money. I think it was like a $4 million deal. I went with Jake Diekman, and some of the numbers you look at, they're not bad. Like his batting average against was 202. That's not bad for a reliever. Um, but the things that just killed Jake Diekman was himself. Like he just was his own worst enemy, walking guys, 24 walks and 32 innings this year. Allowed some big home runs as well in late game situations. Ended up pitching in 43 games for the Mets to a 5.63 ERA. Not very good for a guy that really needed to step up when Brooks Aurelia went down. So there's a lot more on his plate. Unfortunately, he couldn't handle it, at least with the Mets anyway. So the Mets ended up DFAing him around the trade deadline. And just the Jake Diekman was unfortunately um, not the guy we had hoped he could be, or like he was with Tampa Bay last year, getting some big outs for them. I also had a 1.47 whip. That's not very good. So unfortunately, Jake Diekman had a little bit of a longer leash than Joey Wendell did, but the end result was the same. He was cut loose, and unfortunately, that did not work out for Jake Diekman and David Stearns, who brought him in. And it was a shame because he had a nice spring training too. So you thought, maybe there was something there, but a two-headed monster of Raley and Jake Diekman. And once Brooks really went down, and Diekman struggled, the Mets didn't. You always like to have that one lefty in the bullpen. The Mets did have a lefty in the bullpen, which will come up later in these awards. But you kind of like to have a nice solid lefty in there. And fortunately, the Mets were kind of searching for that for the majority of the 2024 season. So we move on from the worst signing to the best minor league signing. Best minor league signing. And once again, I believe you took the low hanging fruit, not to diminish your picks or whatnot, because they're good picks, but they're kind of the obvious ones. So uh, I think I'd probably give a good indication of who Corne's minor league signing is.
Yeah, it's obvious. It's the guy. I think probably one of the better minor league signings you can have in a season. The guy who helped turn this around. Had a song. Oh my God. We doing the hand things. Oh my God, good job. And luckily nobody saw that because that was pretty, but that was not a good effort, Andrew. But yeah, it was just a great asset. We can talk about all the numbers. The numbers were good, but what he did for the team was awesome. So Jose Iglesias was indeed the obvious choice.
Yeah, I didn't know where to go from there, so I had to really kind of do a deep dive and whatnot. And one guy came to mind, but I couldn't remember if he was a minor league sign or just like a waiver claim or whatnot, because obviously there's a big difference between the two. But this guy was indeed a minor league signing, and I just kind of alluded to it when talking about Jake Diekman and the lefties. I went with Danny Young, and I know Danny Young really, from in the month of September, struggled to get outs for the Mets, but there were times he was a really dominant reliever out of that Mets bullpen with that kind of weird angle he throws from. He's a soft tosser, doesn't top out more than maybe 91, 92 with his sinker, but delivering from that arm angle, he can be deceptive. And he did get some big outs, like I said, for the Mets. And we've given him his flowers on previous episodes we've done. And I think Danny Young will be with the. He'll come into camp next year. Obviously, it doesn't cost the Mets anything. It's going to be league minimum. Probably has at least another option or two on his ledger. So it's a depth arm, maybe at least, if the Mets kind of maybe do a little bit of more of a deep dive into the bullpen this offseason, bringing guys in. Danny Young can be a valuable arm for this team. If he is a contributor opening day next year, or if he's down in Syracuse and someone gets hurt and he comes up, they need the guy to pitch some innings. Danny Young did flash at times this year for the Mets, so he was my minor league signing award winner. Um, Move on to a bit of a negative one here. The worst DFA decision by David Stearns in the front office. I will let you take this one because it's another lefty that flashed at times in his Mets tenure that they ended up moving on from.
Yeah, definitely. I think overall DFA decisions weren't bad. I think we have seen in previous seasons where there was somebody getting DFA'd and you thought, hmm, I don't know about that. I think this year it was overall a pretty good job by David Stearns about who they DFA'd. There was one that actually wanted to mention, but he came back, and that was Max Kranick. And I remember when Max Kranick was DFA'd, I thought, what the hell are we doing? Because we need some starting pitching depth, and we DFAing a starting pitcher. So, but yeah, he came back. So didn't really think that that was part of this award. I picked someone who actually left. Eventually, we traded him, but I think we both liked Josh Walker's stuff. Tall lefty, big fastball from the left side. I think there's definitely something in Josh Walker. Um, I think when I heard the news with his potential, being a lefty, especially with, like you said, we didn't have a tremendous amount of lefties that we can rely on. So eventually, luckily, Danny Young did a good job, and luckily, Alex Young also did a good job because at the time I thought that Josh Walker would be a guy who could step in if the Mets finally moved on from Jake Diekman and get a true chance for the Mets in the major leagues. But yeah, there were there were decisions to be made, and eventually it was Josh Walker who the Mets traded for a nice young arm. I think his name is Carreno, who was in the Dominican Summer League, who showed some potential there. So eventually, I think they did well in trading him. But at the time, I would have liked Josh Walker with the situation the Mets were in, with their lefties to stay and maybe get his first real long shot in the Mets bullpen.
Yeah, obviously we're big Josh Walker fans, and we're a little disappointed to see him leave the organization. So that was a good pick there. I went with a guy who probably ruffled some feathers when he pitched against the Mets this year. Um, I think that was actually I'm looking at his baseball page right here, and it looked like it was his last outing of the season. So he must have gotten hurt or something after that. But it was a guy who there was a waiver claim, I believe, early in the offseason, ended up getting designated for assignment, but still stuck with the team going into spring training, and then eventually got moved. I should say too, I thought about Max Kranick as well, but like you said, he didn't actually leave. So, but to get back on track here, the guy I picked was Austin Adams, as we all now probably remember, or if you didn't know where I was leading on to. The Oakland A he went to the Oakland A's and, had an okay season there, not a terrible season, a sub-4 ERA, got some big outs for them. His WHIP was kinda high, 1.46, so, um, that's not necessarily great, 23 walks, in 41 in the third, also hit 13 batters, so, kinda like a Jake Diekman thing where he might have been his own worst enemy at times. But he did get some big outs for the A's, 53 strikeouts in those 41 in the third, so he had the ability to kind of bounce back if there was some traffic. And um, it was a guy that I mean, you always need depth. Um, in pitching depth, bullpen starter, whatever. You need as much as you can. It was a guy that had shown he could be a solid major league reliever. Particularly, you go to 2019. He had a kind of he had a sub 4 ERA, a 1.13 WHIP. His batting average against was 1.179. So a guy that could be dominant at times with his stuff. But the Mets I don't want to say let him get away because they DFA'd him and no one claimed him. They did, and then they just traded him for cash or whatever. Um,
Okay, so
yeah, Austin Adams was the guy who we thought could be a contributor to this bullpen, and unfortunately, he was not a contributor to the Mets bullpen. He was to the Oakland A's bullpen. So I went with Josh Walker, Austin Adams for my worst DFA decision. As we'll move on now to the best trade asset for the New York Mets. Who did you pick as the best trade asset for the Mets?
I'm going with a guy who's been a big part of, um, yeah, a guy who showed how you can help a team win baseball games besides maybe the sexy numbers. Really have to watch this guy play to appreciate what he can do, and that's Tyrone Taylor. I think if you look at the baseball reference page, you think, why is everybody liking this guy so much? So PS is just a little bit over 700 on the year, but he played tremendous defense, made some big plays, had some big hits for us. Always hustles, always plays hard. Remember the great catch he had in the postseason in center field. And I think how Tyrone Taylor played during this season, I think Tyrone Taylor will be a bigger part, is expected to be a bigger part of this outfield next year because he was at times he was a little bit of the forgotten man when Bader played more center field. But I think he established himself as the true fourth outfielder for this team for next year. And that's great. Great to have. Great to have that type of player on team control. So the other part of that trade wasn't necessarily great, but Tyrone Taylor definitely was. So good addition from David Stearns getting his well-known outfielder out of Milwaukee.
That's a good pick there, and obviously, like you said, Tyrone Taylor, maybe a discussion to have in the offseason, but maybe he'll play a little bit of a bigger role next year with the Mets, maybe getting some more at bats and whatnot. But like you said, we'll table those discussions for another time. My trade asset, I went with Jesse Winker. Obviously, the month of August was really good. I know he fell off a bit in September, but when he really needed to turn it back on, he did in October for the Mets. I believe if memory serves me correctly, that he was maybe the only Met batter to have an OPS over 1,000 in the postseason. So he just got some big hits for the Mets as well in August and October. Became a fan favorite pretty easily when he got here. And a guy that maybe is going to be on the Mets radar for someone they want to bring back, depending on how some things shake out in the off season. Perhaps Jesse Winker is a guy they'll sort of circle back to and kind of come back in the same role that he played when he got acquired by the Mets. So Jesse Winker was my best trade asset as we move on to the biggest surprise, in a positive way. We'll have biggest surprise negative. This is biggest surprise positive for the New York Mets. Who did you go with here?
I know you adore my pick, the guy who you liked most of the year. You never was rough on this guy. Sometimes I thought a little bit annoying that you were so high on this guy because he had his flaws during the season. So, but still, I think overall, from the moment I was kidding, from the moment we heard his name in I think in spring training when we said when there was a DFA spot to be made and this guy stayed, I think we both said at the same time, "What the hell? Why isn't this guy DFA'd?" Well, eventually he did play an important part, so obviously we didn't expect that. I'm talking about Reed Garrett. Uh, he definitely had his good and bad stretches. He wasn't necessarily consistent in that department, but luckily, after his great April and a bit of a rougher stretch after he ended the season really, really well in September, he was iffy at times in the postseason, but still overall, I think the season that Reed Garrett had wasn't something that I expected. So definitely a big surprise for me.
Yes, I hope people picked up on your sarcasm when you began your monologue about Reed Garrett there. But biggest surprise,
Probably.
yeah. Well, I would hope so. I hope our listeners are smart enough to kind of pick up on that, and I'm sure they are. Knowing how knowing my history with Reed Garrett there. So my biggest surprise in the positive side, I went with Luis Torrens. I mean, I mean, anything for the Mets backup catcher position was going to be an upgrade over Nito and Omar Narvaez. I mean, worst sign. I wish we could go back to the last offseason and include that because I would have definitely picked Omar Narvaez. But not to make this about Omar Narvaez. We're talking about Luis Torrens here. Came over from the Yankees. He was part of that whole kind of roster shuffle late May when the Iglesias got called up. Um, they picked up Luis Torrens from the Yankees, who I actually saw at spring training. He played like first base, second base, catcher too. So it was a guy that had a little versatility as well. And that was something we talked about when they initially picked him up, what he could bring there. But obviously, he stuck behind the plate his time with the Mets and really provided a spark there for them at a time when, like we said, when they weren't getting much offensively because Alvarez was hurt. They were running out Narvaez and Nito. Those guys are guys that aren't really big power guys offensively or average guys at that back too. And they weren't necessarily playing great defense either. So
Okay.
Torrens came in and solidified all of that for the Mets. I know as the season went on and his playing time became a little less and less, when Alvarez came back, he kind of slipped more into that traditional backup catcher stat line mold, whatever. But he did have some nice at bats down the stretch of the season. I think of the game against the Red Sox on Labor Day. He had a big RBI double in that game. So, no, he did get some hits for the Mets and was obviously great throwing out runners. That was something the Mets desperately need from their backup catcher. So I picked Luis Torrens, my best surprise for the New York Mets, and that's a guy who will be this catching duo of Alvarez and Torrens will be in Queens for the foreseeable future. So Luis Torrens was my pick, and obviously there's good surprises and there's bad surprises. So let's move on to the bad surprises, and um, I'll let you kick this one off as well.
This hurts a little bit saying, but unfortunately, as I mentioned with Mark Vientos, I was a big believer in Brad Beatty. I was very pleased that he got the first shot, getting the third base spot on opening day. He started out pretty good, but then it went downhill soon. And we saw a little bit more of what we saw last year, not lifting the ball, a lot of ground balls, hit the ball hard at times, but mostly on the ground. So something he definitely needs to work on for him to being able to do that in the big leagues. Um, so that was unfortunate. He was still good in AAA, still young, still has some promise, but with the merge of Mark Vientos, I mean, let's be honest. Not me giving up on Brad Beatty, but with all the young infield talent that the Mets have, he might be the odd man out, and he might be a guy who will be who will be around in trade rumors, which which I at one point find um, not, but it's part of the game, and somebody else took his spot, which was his spot to lose, but he lost it to Mark Vientos. In the end, we have Mark Vientos, who we obviously love now. But when when we started this year, I definitely thought that that future, maybe not the power wise, but just the production wise, was for Brett Beatty at third.
Yeah, I like Mark Vientos before everyone liked Mark Vientos, but that's a discussion to have for another time. But yeah, obviously Brett Beatty, that was a little disappointing because we're both Brett Beatty guys, and just much like how Mark Vientos had an uphill battle to claim his spot, Brett Beatty's gonna have an uphill battle, so maybe we'll see a bit of a turnaround for Brett Beatty, like we saw with Mark Vientos. My biggest surprise, disappointment wise, was DJ Stewart. And I know eventually the Mets signed JD Martinez. That was a pretty big sign that they were gonna have JD Martinez be the DH and DJ Store was gonna eventually lose that spot. But really, that once you hit that home run in Atlanta in April, Stewart went on a bit of a tear there to really say, hey, you can't let me go when you come make your roster decision when JD Martinez is ready. And uh, he did not leave. It was Zach Short who got designated for assignment and got the boot. And they kept DJ Stewart around, but really after that, Stewart just kind of fell off. Um, didn't really do much, and I thought he could at least be a nice left-handed power bat off the bench. And he fortunately wasn't really able to do that, and that's a tough thing to be a guy coming off the bench, Um, but unfortunately, DJ Stewart, the kind of the momentum, he couldn't carry that over from late in the 23 season and 24 for the most part. So he was my biggest disappointment, surprise disappointment for the New York Mets this year. And you say you have something to share with the class here, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, DJ Stewart, actually, Jesse Winker was what DJ Stewart should have been. It's a type of the same player, a guy who walks a lot, doesn't chase, and has some power from the left side. But he just couldn't do it, and Jesse Winker could.
Yep, that's a good call there. As we'll move on to our final award as I check the time clock. Oh, we're close to hitting that 50-minute mark here. So we will. Oh, you have something to see? One more thing to say?
Yeah, we forgot comeback player of the year, so we have two awards left.
Oh, I didn't put the comeback player of the year. Oh well,
Oh,
I'll have to think of
it's a
someone on the
bad one.
fly. Well, I'll well let's go on to the clutch player of the year award, and well, I'll let you ramble on about who you picked. Maybe I'll go scour the roster and find a comeback player of the year. So go ahead.
Yeah, you can pick mine because you already picked that guy. So good luck on that. But biggest clutch player, I went with Brandon Nimmo. Brandon Nimmo didn't have his best season, but still drove in 90 runs. I mean, RBIs aren't the biggest part of uh, you know, oh man, I forgot the word, but biggest part of how a player is and how a player performs. But still, Brandon Nimmo had a 1052 OPS in high leverage spots, according to Baseball Reference. So even in a bad year, Brandon Nimmo was able to be an important part of this lineup, driving in runs and being there in the clutch. So kudos, even in a down year, being important for this lineup. It to me is a big plus and shows a lot of character from Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah, I'm gonna hope you're sitting down for this one with my clutch player I picked, and this was mostly because of the work he did from late September into the postseason because he maybe didn't have the. I mean, he had a pretty good series against the Dodgers that bumped his numbers up, but kind of leading up to that series, his numbers weren't maybe great offensively. But every time he got a hit, it seemed like it was a big, important hit. And that was Starling Marte. So I picked Marte for my clutch player. Obviously, I talk about, it's really started in mid to late September. He got the walk-off hit against the Nationals in a game that was, really kind of ugly at the time. And you were wondering, man, the Mets, they really need to beat up on the Nationals. And they were losing 1-0. They're getting beat by Jake Irvin again. But Marte got a big hit to win the game for him there. And uh, like I said, he had some big hits in the postseason as well. They maybe weren't run scoring hits, but he was a guy that got a hit to start the inning. So I went with Starling Marte for my clutch player for the Mets. So, and with that being said, hopefully the Mets can maybe eat some money on that contract and move him in the offseason, depending on what they do.
That's an off-season topic, Henry.
But
That's
that's
an
an
off-season
off-season
topic.
topic. We'll be tabling that for another time as we move on to Comeback Player of the Year award, a award I forgot to mention, but I think I found a guy. I'm probably gonna have to go through some hoops to explain my rationale here. Um, but I know you have a guy that you very much like to share, and I'll let you go ahead.
Well, it's a guy you mentioned, so I'm not gonna repeat that again. But my comeback player of the year, for all the reasons you said, bad year last year. He called himself the worst pitcher in the majors, and turned out to be a very solid mid rotation on this year. It's Luis Severino. What a comeback that guy made! Not only production wise, but also health wise, getting a lot of innings out of Luis Severino is not something I expected. I hoped that would be the case. I hoped that the innings he would get for the Mets would be productive. I really believed in that, but I didn't think he would pitch that many innings. So great, even all the way through in the postseason, he was still um, being a solid, dependable arm. So great comeback season for Luis Severino. And honestly, I could see him being in the running for comeback player of the year in the major leagues as well.
Well, he is a Gold Glove finalist, so maybe he'll
Great.
get the get that nomination as well. So, like I said, I'm gonna have to go through some hoops on this one. I have to explain it, but I think we'll get the grandma's house at the end. I think you'll agree with me on it. Um, I went with Tyler McGill, and and you can even say this is an in-season comeback player of the year too. Um, but you just think about 2023. Um, he had those flashes in 22, but then injuries got him, and he wasn't able to, finish the season as strong as he did starting that season. He only pitched like 15 games or something like that in 22. But in 2023, he had, a pretty solid workload with 25 starts and whatnot. But it was just a lot of walks, not getting deep into games, and really kind of started to wonder what Tyler McGill could potentially be because there was some hype around him, like I said, after his strong start to the 22 season, that maybe this is a guy that could be a middle rotation arm. Comes into this season and gets a rotation spot out of the gate, pitches the third game of the season, gets hurt, and um, and then the times he comes back, he's struggling. Home runs, walks, kind of the same things we saw in 23. And but eventually came back in August to make some starts and eventually work, pitch the rest of the season in the rotation just with how things happened with Senga and Paul Blackburn mostly. Um, and he pitched tremendous for the Mets and was a big arm for them going down the stretch. And uh, 15 16 games, 15 games started. So he pitched about 10 less games than he did last year. So his innings are not where they were last year, but just some numbers that stand out to me that dropped his whip in 2023, 1.58. This year it was 1.31. So a big drop off there. The batting average against last year in 2023, 282 batting average against. This year, 235. So a big drop off there. So once he kind of worked on those things that Jeremy Hefner kind of told him to work on, he became a different pitcher for the Mets and a pretty solid one for them. And also have to give him credit for kind of taking the beating against the Dodgers when he coming out of the bullpen because he kind of had to. So credit to him there for kind of being a sacrificial lamb. So Tyler McGill was my comeback player of the year pick.
Yeah, great. Honestly, for doing this on the fly, I'm impressed with the pick. We talked about Tyler McGill. I think, if I remember correctly, he got his ERA down from 5.23 to 4.04 or something in that range in his last stint. I think he was tremendous late. And I think I also mentioned a couple of podcasts ago that I heard that he was really, learning from Hefner, standing next to Hefner when he doesn't pitch and just go through what pitchers should throw in certain spots. So it really became a learning curve for Tyler McGill. And I hope that it's the start of him being a solid major league arm. I don't know if he has options. That's maybe a topic for the off season podcast. I think we do have to look into that because giving him a true spot in the rotation does depend on what the Mets doing with other arms in their rotation. I think the Mets do have a 6-man rotation coming up, so he could be that sixth guy. But he definitely did well enough to be in that conversation at least. And I think before that latest stint, you probably wouldn't have him in that conversation.
Yeah, obviously Diaz could have been a pick, but we don't like to do the obvious things sometimes. Sometimes we have to pick the obvious guy. Um, but in this situation, well, why not try to get a little creative? So going with Tyler McGill for
And,
comeback
and,
player.
and you couldn't pick Severino, which was
Right,
the obvious one.
right.
I'm not gonna give myself a pat on the shoulders for that pick. That was an obvious pick for me. So you couldn't go there because you picked Severino for best signing. So
Right.
sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to do these awards if you make it fun.
Right. Right. Can't repeat guys and whatnot. So,
No,
well, we're creeping up on an hour here. I told you that, some of all the things you want to talk about. I was like, this might be a long episode just with these subjects, and turned out to be. But that means we have good topics to talk about for off-season episodes, and a lot of those topics are more off-season oriented. And by the time we talk to you next time, which I would at least maybe assume next week. Obviously, we're still kind of working out what an off-season schedule is going to look like. The World Series might be wrapped up, so those off-season topics will become even more relevant because the off-season will have officially begun. So we'll keep you posted on, uh, you know, what the outlook for the off-season is when it comes to episodes and whatnot. But as we approach the 1 hour mark, we will thank Mr. Corne Hogeveen for joining us as usual, and good job with the awards. And this was your baby, and it turned out to be pretty well. Turned out pretty well. So good job on your part.
thank you. Yeah, I think we handled an hour with that. So I think for first episode after the season is over, I think it worked really well. Obviously, right now there's not that much news for the Mets because the World Series is still playing. So you had to be creative to get something and to get a nice episode in there.
No doubt about that. As we'll wrap up episode number 48 of the Queen's Connection, a production of Patent Sports Creative. Make sure to follow us on social media. That's where we're gonna update you on our episode schedules and whatnot. You can do that on Facebook and Twitter. Just search the Queen's Connection. We're also make sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, whatever platform. And we thank you for listening. And well, there's no series to talk to you after, so we will talk to you next time here on the Queen's Connection.